You are listening to the Break Time Tech Talks podcast, a bite-sized tech podcast for busy developers, where we'll briefly cover technical topics, news snippets, and more in short time blocks. I'm your host, Jennifer Reif, an avid developer and problem solver with special interest in data, learning, and all things technology.
I'm still recovering just a bit from some lovely illness, so my voice probably sounds just a bit off today. This year, I was one of two people put in charge of the schedule for Neo4j's online developer conference happening in November. It's called Nodes 2024. Scheduling is a beast, no matter how you slice and dice it, and even the most robust systems and tools usually lack for something in some form. I'll talk a little bit about how my colleague and I avoided a completely manual process. There's also a milestone release for Spring AI 1.0. While this means that it's still not GA, I think it's so close we can almost taste it. I'll talk a little bit about upgrading to the 1.0 milestone and my process there. To kick this off, talking about what we did for scheduling our Nodes 2024 conference talks. Nodes 2024 is, I'll talk a little bit more about the conference in an upcoming episode, but just kind of at a high level. It's a virtual event. It runs across 3 global regions. So we try to cover America's time zones, Europe time zones, and then Asia Pacific time zones. 3 global regions. And then there's 4 technical tracks that run simultaneously in each of those regions. By the time it's all said and done, you have 4 sessions running concurrently across 3 different time zone blocks, which covers about 24 hours almost of content with some breaks in between. So there's a lot of content going on there. Little bit tricky to schedule all this. We use a very common and popular tool called Sessionize to maintain and help keep track of our submissions for talks, presentations, and so on. It does really, really well. It's a very popular platform used by a lot of different conferences at various scales. So it allows you to view speakers, sessions, and the ratings for those sessions. So evaluation ratings, choosing which ones you want to have in your event and which ones don't necessarily fit. But there's nothing that really combines all of those views well, speakers, sessions, and evaluation ratings. Specifically, we were looking for something that took session and speaker time zone and then the session rating. Doing that and looking at those criteria involved a lot of page clicks and hopping between different tabs. In previous years, this was a pretty manual process. I've discovered lots of tabs, switching pages, cross-checking a lot of different data views. This year, we wanted to see if we could avoid some of that by making it a less manual process and maybe skipping some of that multi-tab data crunching. So what we ended up trying is in Sessionize, there's a way to export spreadsheets. And so we did that. We downloaded those, converted those to comma-separated value sheets. They came in Excel format. So we had to convert those to CSV, a plain spreadsheet format, if you will, and then used load CSV command to put them into Neo4j using our query language cipher and a utility library called APOC. Now, we did try to do this without Cypher and APOC, to do this even less manually, kind of with a point and click, using Neo4j's data importer tool. However, there were a few things that it just couldn't, or I wasn't able to find, that it could customize enough to manipulate the data in the way that we specifically needed it. So part of that may have been my limited knowledge. I haven't played a whole lot with the data importer tool, but part of that, maybe it's not designed to be fully customizable for various data manipulations. Anyway, we ended up going the plain Jane route using the query language cipher and our utility library APOC. So we got the data into Neo4j, which is a graph database. Putting the data in a database gave us a lot of power, and databases have a lot of export tools at their disposal, right? They're used to integrating with various platforms and various integrations and all kinds of flat files and other databases and so on. That there's a lot of tools at your disposal to flip, customize, twist, manipulate data how you need to. Query languages also come with a lot of that power as well. So we were able to query the data that we needed, format it in the ways that we needed it, and then export it in that format to something that someone could view in a single page with all the information that we needed, but not extraneous information we didn't need. So again, very customizable, very powerful. And you don't necessarily have to use Neo4j. Now, obviously, I'm going to be biased toward a graph database like Neo4j. It provides a lot of capabilities and features that you might not get with other types of databases. But honestly, any type of database is going to provide these same powers to you, in that you're going to get a query language that allows you customizable features as far as data crunching, and then a lot of export tools that you can use in order to get that data into various formats. So once we did this, I used Cypher to query the data so that I could export it into just another spreadsheet and sent that over to my colleague, who then was able to grab those sessions and dump them into the Sessionize scheduler tool. She still had to take each of those sessions and manually drop them into the schedule, but at least then we weren't having to do the entire process manually, and you were looking between two screens rather than multiple pages and views for every session and all of that. The last thing I want to highlight is the Spring AI migration change, going from 0.8 to the 1.0 milestone release. I had seen a couple of comments about moving to the milestone release. Oh, we've got a 1.0 and it's a milestone. There's going to be a lot of breaking changes and things that are going to be involved here. So I was a little bit intimidated coming in with what might all have to change. I have a couple of different projects and demos running with Spring AI, but it really was not as intimidating and big of an impact as what I had feared. There were some dependency changes, sure, as is typical, to get the new versions of the libraries. And then there were a couple of changes that actually better aligned with typical Spring process and structure. So if you're familiar with how other Spring libraries operate, typically lower level components where you have a lot more customizations and can do a lot more customizing with the layer, those are going to be lower in the stack, the layers. It's going to be one of the lower layers. The higher level components are going to be abstracted, and often you'll see those named something along the lines of client, something client. And this is now the case in the Spring AI 1.0 milestone release. Some of the more customizable things got moved down into lower layers. They renamed a couple of higher abstracted capabilities into a client layer, and so on. So this change, I didn't feel that it was too hard to grasp, or there were many changes involved, and it made sense to align with the rest of the Spring library. The one thing that was a little bit tricky is there was a change to the vector store configs. There's a fourth parameter that is now required for you to specify. So previously that fourth parameter was there, but it was never required for you to actually specify a value. That has changed. And what confused me most was that the documentation combined with the source code and the error message really just didn't make it super apparent what and why it changed. I outline this a little bit better in a blog post. I talk about it in more detail and actually show my process for working through that. But that's kind of the highlight for that. So if you're messing with vector stores in Spring AI, just beware there is now a fourth configuration parameter that is required, and you have to specify it depending on your vector store of choice. So I'll talk more about that in an upcoming episode, but that's at least to start us for now. To wrap up, sometimes you have to think a little bit outside the box when you're dealing with data. While spreadsheets and APIs sometimes get you part of the way there, I've found that a database can often consolidate data while better maintaining lots of different data views and high data integrity. Upgrades can also sometimes be rather intimidating, but I'm really glad that the Spring AI upgrade turned out to be much less hassle than I was expecting. If only more upgrades could be so seamless, right? I hope it's the same for you, and I am really looking forward to the Spring AI 1.0 release that I'm hoping will come in the relatively near future. As always, thanks for listening and happy coding.